Karen Mitchell had always been the model resident of Oakwood Estates. For 7 years, she dutifully paid her HOA fees on time, maintained her lawn to the exact specifications outlined in the community guidelines, and never once hosted a gathering that extended beyond the acceptable noise curfew of 9 p.m. Her neighbors knew her as quiet, perhaps a bit standoffish, but never a troublemaker. That all changed on a sweltering July afternoon. As the temperature climbed to an unbearable 103 degrees, Karen's air conditioning unit sputtered, coughed, and finally died with a pathetic whine. Being a single mother with a child with severe asthma, this wasn't just an inconvenience, it was an emergency. The repair company couldn't come for 3 days. Karen wiped sweat from her brow as she hung up the phone, glancing anxiously at her son Ethan's bedroom door. At 12 years old, Ethan had already been hospitalized twice this summer when the heat triggered severe asthma attacks. The pediatric pulmonologist had been crystal clear. Ethan needed to stay in a cool, controlled environment, especially during this record-breaking heat wave. She frantically called 3 more repair companies, only to hear the same response. "We're booked solid through Friday." By evening, the indoor temperature had climbed to 91 degrees, and Ethan's breathing had become noticeably labored. His rescue inhaler was providing less relief with each use. Karen's neighbor Diane had offered to let them stay at her place, but Diane had 2 cats, and Ethan's allergies would make his condition worse. Hotels in the area were booked solid due to a regional baseball tournament. Karen's parents lived 3 states away. Desperate, Karen drove to the nearest big box store and spent nearly her entire month's savings on a portable air conditioning unit. It wasn't ideal, nowhere near powerful enough to cool the entire house, but it could at least keep Ethan's bedroom at a safe temperature. The installation instructions were simple enough. The exhaust hose needed to vent hot air outside. The only viable window was in the front of the house, visible from the street. Karen hesitated, knowing full well that Section 8, Paragraph 3 of the Oakwood Estates HOA covenant explicitly prohibited any visible apparatus, machinery, or equipment on the front-facing exterior of homes. But as she heard Ethan's wheezing grow worse, her decision was made. She installed the unit, positioning the exhaust hose through the partially open window and securing it as neatly as possible. Relief washed over her as Ethan's room began to cool. He fell into a peaceful sleep for the first time in days. The doorbell rang at 7:30 the next morning. Karen, who had barely slept, opened it to find no one there, just a red violation notice taped beside the doorknob. The official HOA letterhead bore the signature of Gerald Thompson, HOA president. Immediate action required. Unauthorized exterior fixture visible from street view. $500 fine will be assessed if not removed by 9:00 a.m. tomorrow. Additional daily fines of $100 will accrue until compliance is achieved. Karen stared at the notice, her hands trembling. The $500 fine would wipe out what little remained of her savings after purchasing the AC unit, but removing it could put Ethan in the hospital or worse. That evening, as the neighborhood families retreated to their perfectly climate-controlled homes for dinner, something inside Karen finally snapped. She walked out into the middle of the cul-de-sac, clutching the violation notice, tears streaming down her face. "My son can't breathe," she screamed, her voice echoing off the pristine facades of the surrounding homes. "He can't breathe, and you're worried about how my house looks." Neighbors peeked through blinds and cautiously opened front doors. They'd never seen Karen like this, the quiet, rule-following single mom now standing in the fading daylight, literally crying for help as her son struggled to breathe in the stifling heat of their home. The next morning, Gerald Thompson, the infamously rigid HOA president, who once fined a resident for having Christmas lights up on January 2nd, sat in his home office staring at his computer screen. His inbox had exploded overnight with messages from residents, many of whom had never bothered to attend a single HOA meeting. Even worse, the community Facebook group had transformed from discussions about property values and landscaping recommendations to a virtual mob demanding accountability. Cynthia from 2 streets over had captured Karen's breakdown on her phone and posted it with the caption, "Is this what our HOA stands for?" Harassing a single mother while her child can't breathe. Hashtag awkward shame. The post had been shared by residents and their extended networks, gathering hundreds of comments in just hours. Gerald's wife, Eleanor, placed a cup of coffee beside him. "You need to call an emergency meeting," she said quietly. "This isn't going away." By 10 a.m., all 7 board members were seated around the polished oak table in the community clubhouse. The tension was palpable. "We need to handle this PR nightmare immediately," announced Maria Vasquez, the newest board member, tapping her perfectly manicured nails on her tablet. "Have you seen what they're calling us online? Heartless bureaucrats is the kindest term. The local news station has already called me for comment." Richard Hoffman, the treasurer who had served alongside Gerald for 5 years, cleared his throat. "The bylaws are clear. Section 8, paragraph 3 specifically prohibits." "Oh, shut up about the bylaws, Richard," snapped Eleanor Thompson, who had insisted on attending despite not being on the board. "A child could have died." Gerald, who had been uncharacteristically quiet, finally spoke. "I drove by Karen's house last night after receiving some concerned calls." The room fell silent. Gerald was known for his by-the-book approach, never making exceptions for anyone, including the time he fined himself for leaving his garbage can visible from the street during his wife's cancer treatments. "I knocked on her door around 11 p.m., he continued, his voice unusually subdued. "She looked terrible, hadn't slept in days. The inside temperature was 94 degrees. Her son." He paused, removing his glasses and rubbing his temples. "Her son was using a nebulizer just to breathe. The poor kid's lips were blue." Gerald placed his palms flat on the table. "We've gotten so caught up in property values that we've forgotten about the actual people who live here. I'm as guilty as anyone. More guilty, probably." The board members exchanged uncomfortable glances. They had never seen Gerald like this. "What are you suggesting?" asked Maria, her tone noticeably softer. "First, we re-sign the violation notice immediately. Second, we approve an emergency expenditure from our reserve fund to replace her entire AC system, not just repair it." Gerald looked each board member in the eye. "And third, we begin reviewing our covenant enforcement procedures. There need to be humanitarian exceptions." After a moment of stunned silence, the vote was unanimous. Maria volunteered to personally deliver the news to Karen and arrange for an emergency HVAC installation that same day. As the meeting adjourned, none of them could have predicted how this single decision would cascade into events that would transform not just their board, but the entire Oakwood Estates community to its core. Karen couldn't believe the dramatic reversal of fortune. Just hours after her public breakdown, Maria Vasquez was at her doorstep with news that not only was the violation rescinded, but the HOA would cover the cost of a complete HVAC replacement. By sunset, technicians from Premier Cooling Solutions, the most expensive service in the county, were installing a top-of-the-line system. "We need to check something in the old unit before we remove it completely," explained Troy, the lead technician, as he carefully examined the outdoor compressor. His expression darkened as he shined his flashlight into the unit's inner workings. "Ma'am, I think you should see this." Karen peered over his shoulder, confused by the strange crystalline residue coating several crucial components. "That's not normal wear and tear," Troy said grimly. "Someone poured industrial-grade drain cleaner or something similar into your system. This was deliberate sabotage." Within an hour, Officer Jenkins and Detective Rivera from the Oakwood Police Department were examining the unit while Karen sat at her kitchen table, bewildered. "I don't understand," she kept saying. "Why would anyone do this?" "Do you have any security cameras?" Detective Rivera asked, her keen eyes scanning the property. "No, but Mr. Abernathy across the street has one of those doorbell cameras," Karen replied. Mr. Abernathy, a retired security consultant, was eager to help. His comprehensive system had captured not just his own property but much of the street, including a clear view of Karen's front yard. The footage from 3 days earlier showed a man in a work uniform approaching her air conditioning unit, looking furtively around before kneeling beside it for approximately 2 minutes. "He's wearing a cap pulled low, but we can make out a logo on his shirt," Detective Rivera noted, squinting at the screen. Westfield Maintenance Services. The name struck a chord with Karen. Westfield, as in Westfield Development. They've been sending me letters about buying my house. Detective Rivera's expression sharpened. How many letters? Karen retrieved a folder from her desk drawer. Inside were 11 increasingly insistent letters from Westfield Development, the most recent offering $15,000 above her original purchase price, still significantly below current market value. They said everyone else in the neighborhood had agreed to sell. Karen explained, her voice faltering. But this is my home. We've been here since Ethan was 5. His school is nearby, his doctor's. We can't just leave. She hesitated, then added, the last letter said I was impeding progress and should reconsider my stubborn position. Detective Rivera made some calls while Officer Jenkins took detailed notes. Within hours, they had uncovered something disturbing. 6 other Oakwood Estates homeowners who had initially refused to sell to Westfield had experienced mysterious property damages in the past months. A garage door opener that suddenly failed, landscape lighting that short-circuited, a basement that flooded from a mysteriously cut water line. All incidents had been reported to the HOA, but dismissed as either homeowner negligence or random vandalism. No investigation had been pursued. There's a pattern here. Detective Rivera explained to Karen, Gerald, and Maria, who had returned after hearing about the police presence. And it connects to something bigger. Westfield Development has been buying properties throughout Oakwood Estates at below-market prices. Their plan, according to county permit applications, is to demolish the existing homes and build luxury condominiums. Gerald's face had gone pale. That's impossible. Any redevelopment would need HOA board approval, and we've never. He stopped abruptly, a horrified realization dawning on his face. What is it? Maria asked. Board meetings, Gerald whispered. Richard Hoffman has been handling all zoning and development inquiries for the past year. He insisted it would streamline our processes. Detective Rivera's phone buzzed with a text. She glanced at it, then looked up grimly. The logo on the saboteur's shirt. It's a subsidiary of Westfield Development. And according to business registration documents, Westfield's CEO is James Thompson. Maria looked confused, but Karen remembered the name from neighborhood gossip. Your brother-in-law, she said quietly to Gerald. Eleanor's brother. 1 year later, on a perfect summer evening, the residents of Oakwood Estates gathered in the Central Park area that had once been nothing more than an underutilized patch of meticulously maintained grass. Children laughed as they played on the colorful new playground equipment, while adults chatted around picnic tables laden with potluck dishes. A banner stretched between 2 oak trees read, 1 year of new beginnings. Karen Mitchell stood near the newly installed community garden, watching her son Ethan teach younger children how to identify the ripest tomatoes. His asthma attacks had decreased dramatically over the past year, partly due to the comprehensive air filtration system that had been installed in their home, a benefit now extended to every household with respiratory concerns, funded by the settlement money. The lawsuit against Westfield Development and the former board members had been swift and decisive, resulting in a $3.2 million settlement for the community. Under Karen's leadership, the new board had allocated those funds thoughtfully. The new playground equipment is a hit, said Diane Kowalski, joining Karen with a glass of lemonade. Once just a neighbor she occasionally waved to, Diane had become a close friend and the head of the community's newly formed senior support committee. Remember when this space was just for looking at, not for using? Karen smiled. Hard to believe we used to get citations for stepping on the grass after rainfall. The Oakwood Estates HOA regulations had been completely rewritten during intensive community workshops, where every resident had a voice. While standards were still maintained, homes were well kept, and the neighborhood remained visually appealing. A new neighbors first policy ensured that human needs always took precedence over aesthetic concerns. The settlement had funded not just physical improvements, but social ones as well. The community center, once primarily used for board meetings and reprimanding residents, now hosted after-school programs, senior activities, and a monthly community dinner where neighbors actually got to know each other beyond their addresses. The Neighborhood Watch program had been reimagined as a community care network, where residents checked on elderly neighbors during extreme weather, coordinated meal trains for families facing medical challenges, and maintained a tool-sharing program that reduced everyone's expenses. Most remarkably, property values had increased by 12% over the previous year, higher than any of the surrounding developments. Realtors now specifically highlighted the compassionate community governance in their listings for Oakwood Estates, and there was a waiting list of families hoping to move in. Maria Vasquez, who had remained on the board as treasurer, approached with a tablet in hand. "Karen, the community engagement survey results are in. 97% satisfaction rate with the new governance approach. That's unprecedented." Karen nodded, watching Mr. Chen teaching a group of interested residents how to perform basic car maintenance at the workshop area that had been set up in what was once an unnecessarily large ornamental fountain. The irony is that everything the old board wanted, property values, community prestige, aesthetic appeal, we're achieving it all. We just had to put people first instead of rules, Karen reflected. Gerald Thompson approached, looking older but somehow lighter than he had a year ago. He had declined Karen's offer to serve on one of the many community committees, choosing instead to volunteer quietly with the neighborhood beautification efforts. The small garden of native plants he'd helped establish in the East Corner had become a butterfly sanctuary that delighted residents of all ages. "I never properly apologized," he said, his eyes meeting Karen's directly for perhaps the first time. "I got so caught up in rules that I forgot why we have communities in the first place." Karen smiled. "That's the thing about crying for help," she replied, watching her son laugh with his friends. "Sometimes it's not just for yourself, but for everyone who's been suffering in silence." As the sun set over Oakwood Estates, neighbors who had once only communicated through violation notices and formal complaints now shared meals, stories, and genuine connections. Proof that sometimes it takes one person's courage to transform a neighborhood of houses into an actual home. The revelation of Gerald's connection to Westfield development spread through Oakwood Estates like wildfire. By the following evening, residents were demanding answers. Text messages, emails, and phone calls flooded in, prompting Gerald to call an emergency community-wide meeting. The Oakwood Estates clubhouse had never been so packed. Folding chairs filled every available space, with latecomers standing against walls and spilling out onto the patio. The murmur of angry voices created a constant buzz that fell silent only when Gerald Thompson stepped up to the podium. He looked haggard, as if he'd aged years in mere days. Eleanor was noticeably absent. "Thank you all for coming," he began, his voice lacking its usual authoritative edge. "I know there are rumors circulating, and you deserve the truth." He paused, taking a deep breath. "For years, I've believed that our strict guidelines were protecting our community. I've enforced rules without exception because I genuinely thought it maintained what made Oakwood Estates special." He removed his glasses, pinching the bridge of his nose. "But it seems I have been protecting property values while leaving our actual neighbors vulnerable." The crowd stirred uncomfortably as Gerald continued. "Detective Rivera's investigation has uncovered that Westfield Development, the company attempting to buy out our neighborhood for a luxury condominium project, is owned by my brother-in-law, James Thompson." Gasps and angry murmurs rippled through the audience. What I didn't know, or perhaps didn't want to know, was that James had privately approached other board members with promises of premium units in the new development and significant kickbacks in exchange for facilitating the neighborhood transition. Gerald's voice cracked. "I never received or accepted such offers directly, but I allowed myself to be blinded by family loyalty and failed to question why certain board decisions were being rushed through." From the back, Richard Hoffman stood up abruptly. "This is slander," he shouted, his face flushed. "You have no proof of any wrongdoing." Detective Rivera stepped forward from the side of the room. "Actually, Mr. Hoffman, we have quite a lot. Your phone records show dozens of calls to Westfield's offices, and your bank statements show some very interesting deposits that coincide with each property sale to Westfield. As Hoffman sputtered denials, Mike Peterson, a normally quiet resident from Birch Lane, stood up. My garage door mechanism was destroyed 3 days after I refused Westfield's offer. The HOA said it was just old equipment failing. I had to pay $800 to replace it. His statement opened the floodgates. One by one, residents shared similar stories: mysterious damages, intimidation tactics, and dismissive responses from certain board members when they reported issues. Diane Kowalski, the retired school teacher from Oak Circle, revealed that she'd been told her home had foundation issues that would be prohibitively expensive to fix. An assessment provided by an inspector recommended by the HOA. She'd sold to Westfield out of fear, only to drive by later and see no foundation work being done before renovations started. Karen, who had been sitting quietly in the back with Ethan, finally stood up. The room fell silent as all eyes turned to her. "I never wanted to cause trouble," she said softly, her voice somehow carrying through the packed room. "All I wanted was to keep my son safe. But this is more than just my home. It's about whether we're really a community or just a collection of houses with matching paint colors." She gestured to faces in the crowd. When Ethan was diagnosed with asthma, Mrs. Abernathy brought us dinner every night for a week. When my car wouldn't start last winter, Mr. Chen jumped it without my even having to ask. That's community, not color-coordinated mailboxes or perfectly trimmed hedges. Her words struck a chord. Nods of agreement spread throughout the room. Gerald stepped back to the podium. "I'm resigning as HOA president, effective immediately. I recommend the entire board do the same, and that we hold emergency elections for a new board tonight." By the end of that contentious, emotional 3-hour meeting, the entire HOA board had resigned. A new emergency board was elected, with Karen Mitchell, to her own astonishment, receiving a unanimous vote as its president.